Hello everyone, Benjamin Lindsay here, Senior Editor at Backstage, and we are joined today by Mr. Dominic Sherwood.
Hello.
Star of Shadowhunters on Freeform. You're kind of making the rounds, previewing
Correct.
The second half of Season 3, which is coming February 25th.
Mm-hmm.
Super happy to have you here. Thank you for having me. Yeah. So I mean, this is the second and final half of Season 3, final installments of the series.
That's right, yeah.
Is it a little bittersweet at this point? You're done filming and everything.
It is, yeah, and it was actually just completely happenstance. Like our last day on set, all of us together, happened to be a scene where everyone was together, and we had guest stars come in that we hadn't seen since Season 1, and they were all in the same place at the same time. It was just completely by accident that was the scene we were filming that day. And it was like, you know, like we've really achieved something here that's really cool, but at the same time it's sad because it's coming to an end now, and it's tough. It's an interesting sort of dichotomy because this was my life for 3 years. For 3 years I literal blood, sweat and tears went into this show, and to see it kind of be rounded out, and you never really anticipate that last day is coming, and then all of a sudden it's your last shot, and it's happening. So it was a weird moment, but it's, you know, we've got to focus on the fact that we did something that we're all very proud of, and all good things do come to an end at some point, because otherwise, I mean, the other option would have been, and we used to laugh about this all the time, is that we'd do 10 seasons and run out of ideas, and we'd be doing like a dreadful musical episode at some point that nobody wanted to do. So it's like, it's probably better that we ended kind of on our terms, and, you know, we still had the books to go by, and we hadn't run out of interesting ideas.
Certainly. Well, what has been your favorite part of these last 3 seasons and diving into this material and playing this?
So there's a huge amount of complexity to my character, which is what I found really interesting from the beginning. That, and I didn't have a job, and I really wanted a job. Like one of those two things. I think what was so interesting about him is he had this huge arc that we knew was already in the books, but I didn't know necessarily if they were going to put that in the stories on TV or whatever. And he just goes through this journey of being like sort of the super confident, like kick-ass soldier, warrior, golden boy, to being completely broken to almost nothing, and then built back up and back down and back up and back down. And I think that was really interesting for me because quite literally no 2 days were the same. And very often in some of the other jobs I've had, the character stays the same the whole way through, which makes sense because most people do, so that reflects how human beings behave. But this was really interesting because, you know, every episode something was vastly different with my character, which I really enjoyed. Yeah,
and especially in this kind of context, I'm glad you touched on that, because I was going to say that despite the fact that this is kind of a supernatural series, you are playing a superhuman character.
Right.
He is riddled with a lot of vulnerability, and for you as an actor, there's a lot of depth for you to mine there.
Definitely, yeah, and I think one of the big things that we all spoke about with the production and the writers and the other actors is really humanizing these characters, because they are, you know, they're ridiculous and fantastical, and there are wizards and werewolves and vampires, and they're dealing with these, you know, insane problems that are the end of the world, and like needing to feed on blood but not wanting to kill anybody, and, you know, they're like under a spell or they're possessed or whatever it is, but at the same time they're still dealing with their love lives, or the fact that their sister can't cook, or, you know, like silly little things that human beings deal with, and things that we thought were really important because they do humanize these characters, and we want an audience to be able to relate to a lot of these people, especially with touching on things that are very serious in this day and age more and more, with things like sexuality or like race relations or whatever, things that we felt we had a responsibility to really look at from an important point of view, and show these strong, powerful characters in these positions, and how they deal with the issues befalling them that also reflect themselves in real life.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the genre itself has always lent itself to being allegorical for these larger social things, but for a show of this magnitude to kind of tackle those, and for you as an actor to tackle those, I think it's it doesn't go unnoticed, and that's why fans have kind of latched onto it.
Yeah, that kind of seems to be the case, that fans have really latched onto it because of the humanizing nature of the show.
Yeah.
And that's honestly, for me, some of our proudest moments is when people come up and say, you know, a big thing that my character was dealing with was self-abuse and abusive family relationships, which again, they were, you know, sort of a little bit fantastical, but they did have underlying currents in real life, and in human behavior. So when people come up to me, fans of the show, and say, you know, the way you dealt with it on the show and the way the writers dealt with it on the show and the way it was portrayed really helped me to go through whatever it was that I was personally going through, it is really a blessing for us, because it's, you know, I do what I love every day and I'm managing to help people doing it, which is wonderful.
Yeah. Now, what is your script work and process like with your co-stars, diving into the media or emotional material, but then also when you are working on things like green screens and CGIs that are added later, like how do you, what is kind of the negotiation there?
Well, that's tricky. So, like the green screen stuff first, like that for me, that's always really hard work, because what's difficult is that you have this interaction with people, and because the show, the way we filmed it, was so fast paced, very often we didn't have things like the storyboards or the images ahead of time, so we didn't know what these creatures looked like. So we've got 6 people on camera who are imagining something entirely different and seeing it bigger or smaller or faster or slower, so you have to sort of go through this very technical process that takes away from the art a little bit of, you know, how we need someone to track, like, how quickly is this thing moving through the sky, or how tall are the mountains that we're looking at, or whatever it is. And then we all have to have that conversation and sort of put the science behind the art. As far as like the acting with other actors and the script work and all of the emotional stuff, my thing that I tend to do is, I know the lines obviously, and I understand who Jace is as a character, and I understand his thought process and the things he would think in these places, and then I try not to rehearse too much. Like I like to do it on my own, and then I like to run things with like some of the other actors, and some of the other actors don't find that helpful, so it's kind of a sort of a give and take, and you learn and you understand what other people like and how that's going to benefit you and how you can benefit other people. But as a general rule, especially the heavier emotional stuff, I like to kind of just run with it. You know, the words are on the page and the emotions are already there because I understand who Jace is and how he feels about things. So I like to just kind of be as present as possible in those moments. And the other actors around me are always amazing at supporting and nurturing those emotions as they kind of come out, and we almost explore together.
Yeah. Is that being conscious of over-rehearsing in that way? Is that something that you've kind of learned through your training? I know that you trained in London, is that right?
Just through school. I didn't go to like a formal acting centre or anything. And actually probably through that maybe was the case, because I think early in my career I would very much over-rehearse, and I could feel myself, so it sounds very strange, but like actively acting. I could feel myself telling myself to feel these emotions as opposed to actually letting these emotions kind of bubble to the surface via the stimulus. So that I think that is something that I learned over the course of doing a few films and watching them and sort of seeing that there's something a little bit missing. Like, I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I can see that whatever it is, it's just not quite there. And you know, far be it for me to say that that's the right way or the wrong way to do it, or even that I've necessarily mastered that art, because I think in the arts you're always growing and you're always going to try and progress and reach another level, and I think maybe that's why I'm so drawn to it, is because it's very sort of personally challenge based. But yeah, for me, I definitely watched some movies where I was like, that was terrible, we need to sort that out, because that was just dreadful. And this is kind of the process that I found myself at the moment, and who knows, maybe the next job will change that process or evolve it in another way. I'm not sure. That's why I love it so much, is it is constantly evolving and it's constantly changing as an art form for the individual and for sort of the populace. So speaking of future projects, what kind of things are you looking to tackle? I mean, the big thing at the moment is I've done quite a bit of supernatural in the last sort of 5 years, and that's something I'd like to take a step away from, at least for the minute, for sort of for the moment. Just because I've been exploring, as we were mentioning, these kind of fantastical worlds, and for me it would be very interesting to explore something more based in like everyday reality, whether it's in the past. Like, I sort of made this joke that I would love to be a cowboy at some point, but that would be quite interesting because it's sort of this interesting anthropological look at who we used to be as human beings, and you know, the difference in simple things like diet or clothing, or the way people walked and why they walked that way. You know, like the thought of, just sort of off the top of my head, like why was that sort of stereotype of cowboys walking a certain way with like almost bow legs, and of course it's because they were riding horses every day. And things like that. There was a lot of that in Shadowhunters, the sort of the articulations of a character that I like to put in. Like Jace had sort of like a side-to-side swagger, and a lot of that came from a martial arts training that was, you shift your weight from one foot to the other to avoid a punch or to avoid a sword or for whatever it was. And that was so drummed in him from a young age that when he walked, he sort of landed in this place where he did sort of sway side to side because that's how he was trained, and he has no other thought process in. He was holding a sword before he could walk, so he learned to walk and fight at the same time, so it would make sense that those two things kind of interjected in each other. So that's sort of what I quite like about acting, is really finding the nitty-gritty things about these individual characters. And I think that's why I'd like to move on to something, like I said, maybe a little less fantastical, and more rooted in either historic or current reality.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking to see where it takes you.
Me too. Yeah.
Now to look at some of your other roles, I feel like Jace was such a breakout role for you over these last few years, and I'm sure that you're looking at roles of a similar caliber, but Backstage readers, a lot of them are the early career folks,
right?
So they might find themselves more in the guest role, or I know that you did a music video.
I did, yeah, and honestly, that was a huge step in the right direction for me, because, and I will love and appreciate Taylor forever for asking me to be a part of that, because it did. I couldn't say I could or couldn't, because we'll never know now, but it's very possible that I wouldn't have got the part in Shadowhunters had I not done the music video, and it was possible that I wouldn't have got the part in Taylor's music video had I not done Vampire Academy, where I met Sarah, who introduced me to Taylor, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So, but it's interesting because everyone has their own individual journey, and I think it's very easy for especially actors to look at, like, just the people up on this board here, and I'm looking at like Chris Hemsworth and Eddie Redmayne and thinking, why isn't my career going that way, or why is it not, or why is it going this way instead of this way? And I think the reason for that is because acting especially is so individual. Like we were mentioning earlier, I didn't go to drama school, and a lot of my friends did go to drama school, and we're having very different career paths now because we took different steps on our own journey. And I think trying to make your feet fit into the footsteps of someone that you aspire to be is, in my opinion, the wrong way of doing it. You can aspire to be that person, but you have to find your own way there, because otherwise you're trying to mimic someone who experiences life differently than you do, and you're trying to put your experiences in their footsteps, and I don't think that works, personally.
No, I would agree, to say the least. But when you are maybe as a guest role or something a little smaller, what insight do you have now at this point about making the most of that experience, about making your work get other work?
I think the big things with guest stars, and honestly a lot of this I learned from our guest stars in Shadowhunters, because they were sort of fairly regularly gave these just outstanding performances, and I used to come into set and watch. So, because I'd read it in the script, I'm like, not in this day, but I want to see, David Castro do. He's got a big scene where he has to sort of cry and break down. We wanted to watch it. We wanted to see this guy come in and do his thing. And every time we were blown away. And I think the big thing is it's not a competition for me. It's never a competition. You're not trying to upstage anyone, but you also shouldn't be afraid to go in and do your absolute, your best job. You are there for a reason. You got hired for a reason. People have faith in you. Nobody wants you to come on set and fail. That's not the case. And it's the same, with auditions. You can be nervous about auditions, but no casting director wants you to walk into the room and be terrible. Like they're probably at their end of their rope. Like my manager did a movie, and he was in the casting room, and he said, we wanted someone to come in and blow us away because we were bored of casting. I think we were done with it at that point. We wanted someone to come in and be like, yep, that's you, great, we're done. Now let's move on. And I think that's the key thing to remember, is that no matter how big or small your part is, everyone wants you to succeed, and you are an integral part of this process, whether you think it's a small role or a big role. And it's that sort of old saying that there aren't really small roles, because each one is sort of a little piece of the watch or the clock that makes the whole thing work together. So just have confidence in yourself, and be aware that you are a piece of this ensemble, and it's important for you to be there, and it's important for you to show up and be honest and open and give your best performance.
Yeah. And you find yourself now in a position where you're potentially auditioning for new projects and whatnot. How do you typically prepare? How do you make the most of that experience?
So it's tricky and it's very different, sort of dependent on the project and dependent on, this is something I'm learning more and more. I'm sort of developing relationships with casting directors, and some casting directors like for you to be very sort of to the letter and to the word, and that's very important to them. And some casting directors kind of encourage you not to do that and encourage you to sort of have a bit of a play with the words or whatever. And the problem with that is there are thousands of casting directors out there, and you're going to meet thousands and thousands. There is no rule for each one. So for me, I do what I try and do if I have the time, and this is something I do on a much bigger level when I've been offered a role for auditions. I try and get as much of the character down and look at the breakdown, and if there's not enough information in there, I try and sort of fill in the blanks wherever I can, do whatever research I need to do, and then I just go out for a day and sort of try and like imitate the mannerisms of that character, and like I was saying, try and come up with some of those sort of fun little idiosyncrasies that character might have. Things like a walk, or like how would they smoke a cigarette, or how would they eat their pasta that day, or how would they drink a beer, and natural things that I would do every day instead of doing it. And this is something I learned when I did a movie called Not Fade Away with David Chase, and I played a young Mick Jagger, and that was the big thing was. And it really helped me get into touch with it. I would watch young Mick Jagger videos of him smoking, because he didn't smoke the way I smoked. He smoked the way Mick Jagger smoked. Right. So it was really important that I found that sort of link, because I'm playing someone who existed, and the way I prepare for these characters is sort of treat them all like they are people who existed. They have a way that they walk. They drive their car a certain way. They, like I said, they smoke a certain way. They eat a certain way. They sleep a certain way. Is he the sort of person who likes to sleep on his back, or does he roll over? Does he move in his sleep? And then most importantly, why do they do those things? It's not just, this would be an interesting thing to do for this character. It's like, why would why does he roll over in his sleep? Does he have something going on that makes him uncomfortable when he's sleeping? Does he have nightmares? Why does he have nightmares? And to try and, unfortunately, sometimes these situations you're very limited with time, but as much as you can, find these key things and give them a full reason, like a lifelong reason. The characters I'm playing are anywhere between 20 and 30, and it means they've had between 20 and 30 years of living, and there's a reason they do everything that they do, whether it's an injury, or they're afraid of something, and things like that. So Jace, for example, is very famous in the books that his whole family is afraid of ducks. And it's like a fun, it's supposed to be a joke, like it's a funny thing. And we have a set called the Jade Wolf, which is kind of the vampire's hideout, and they always have cooking ducks in the back of them, which is a Chinese restaurant. And every time Jace walked in, he would sort of just give it a bit of a wide berth, like he wasn't super comfortable that they were there, you know what I mean? And it's one of those things that you won't see unless you look for it, but I know that that's how Jace feels. I'm aware that he is uncomfortable that they're there, and he just sort of gives it a bit of a, sort of wanders around a little bit more cautiously than everyone else. And things like that I really think it's something I notice, and maybe it's because I'm an actor, but it's something I notice in characters where I'm like, oh, that was cool. And then sometimes you see it later on and you're like, Eddie Redmayne's a great example, who's, I don't know, you guys probably can't see it, but he's right, his picture is right there. He's a great example. He's very, very good at his entire body encapsulates whatever that character is. So even things like Fantastic Beasts, and he has this sort of thing where he's sort of uncomfortable looking at people directly in the eye, and you see it very often, and then when he does look at someone, it's a real step for him to move forward, or that's how I envisioned it. It's a real sort of leap of faith for him to do that, and that's all rounding a very full character. It's rounding a very full person, because even you and I talking right now, you're, I'm sure, noticing different mannerisms in the way I talk. I'm using my hands quite a bit, and that's like who I am. And you, I'm noticing a lot more stoic, and you're very in control of the situation, and that's great. And that's who human beings are. So for you to kind of ignore some of those things in characters is doing these characters a misservice, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that, and especially drawing a parallel to something like Mick Jagger. People talk all the time about it demanding so much respect to be playing a real character, but it sounds like no matter who you're playing, fictional or not, you need to bring that respect to the table. They are a full.
Well, because they are, exactly. That's exactly right. Because to some people, to these audiences, these are real people, and they have had 20 years or 30 years of experience in whatever it is that they do. So I think it really is important that like you mentioned, that we do a service to fictional or non-fictional characters. The difference is with people who have existed is a lot of that work is already done for you.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's not like Rami Malek had the ability to think, I would dance, maybe he would dance this way. No, Freddie Mercury danced the way Freddie Mercury danced, and you then have to match that. You have to make yourself. And so I think personally that's a lot harder, and it from my point of view, have a huge amount of respect for guys like Eddie and Rami, who have played these very, very famous, prolific characters, because not only do you have to get into their sort of emotional headspace, but you're not in charge of those reasonings why. They already exist. They're given to you. Freddie Mercury moves the way he moves because that is Freddie Mercury's story, and it's sort of already there. So the creative process is more of a, not mimicking it, it's, I don't really know how to describe it, but guys like that demand a huge amount of respect from me, because I think it's a near impossible task to do it.
Right.
Very
precise.
Exactly,
yeah. Excellent. Well, Dominic, before we call it a day, I have a few audience questions.
Absolutely, yeah, let's do it.
Thank you everyone for tuning in.
Thank you.
This has been such a treat to get to know you a bit.
Yeah.
Let's see here. How about this one? Viewer named Jackson. Hi, Jackson.
Hi, Jackson.
How can aspiring actors stay confident in an industry that's so tough? Do you have any daily rituals that help with building confidence?
Well, I drink, so no, I'm kidding. Don't do that. I think it's tough. It's really tough, and I think what I try and do. So you and I were talking earlier about an audition that did really put me out of my comfort zone. It wasn't my wheelhouse, and I won't say what it was for, but it was for a musical, and it's not something particularly that I was necessarily comfortable with, and I was terrified, genuinely terrified at each stage of this auditioning process. And what I try and do is take an emotion like fear, where there is a huge amount of adrenaline running through my body because I'm afraid, and turn that into sort of an excitement, like a fuel, and it's so much easier said than done. It took me a long time to and I'm still fine-tuning it now. But for me, the best thing to do is to use those emotions and use that kind of electricity and that fire and turn it into whatever the energy is in that scene. So, even if it is a stoic scene or a quieter scene, you still have energy about you. You still have a gravitas about you. And what I try and do is use that fear or the shakes or whatever it is and turn that into, this is the energy I'm giving to this character. Even if he needs to be quiet or slow or whatever it is, there is still an energy there. There is still a persona and a person, a spirit and a soul that's all still existent there. So I try and take that nervousness. But I also don't think nerves are a bad thing. I don't think fear is a bad thing. I think, bravery doesn't exist without fear. You can't be brave in a situation unless you're afraid of it. It's not an absence of fear. That's being stupid. If you're not afraid of whatever it is,
sure.
You should be afraid of it, and you should be, not apprehensive. You should be sort of exhilarated by this feeling. And I think that in some ways means you're on the right path. It means you're challenging yourself in the right way and pushing yourself in the right direction. So. I think. I'm so sorry, I forgot his name. What was his name?
Jackson.
Jackson.
Yes.
I think Jackson. You use those emotions and use that fear and that nervousness. I know when I was starting, it would make me forget lines and it would make me uncomfortable. And unfortunately, that's just a pattern of behaviour you'll need to drum out of yourself and power through until that's not the behaviour anymore. But I still get nervous for most auditions.
Yeah.
In fact, probably all auditions, I'll still get nervous for at some point, and I turn that into an excitement and a sort of a remembrance of, I do really enjoy doing this. Like, this is kind of why I do it. It's you're in the wings, ready to go on stage, and you get the jitters, and that's fun. I like that.
Yeah.
That's my super long-winded answer to a very short question.
No, I love that, and I love the idea that there is no such thing as bravery without fear.
There isn't. Yeah.
Let's see, we'll take two more.
Mm-hmm.
One from Ariana. What resources did you use to book roles when you were first starting out? So I guess this would be in London. How did you go about finding your work?
So it's a kind of healthy mix of two things, because there is a luck element to it. Absolutely, there's a luck element to it, especially when you're starting, because you get sent in for sort of everything, and a lot of those roles you're not right for. I was being sent in for quarterback American football players, and I'm like, yeah, I'm 160 pounds. This is not the case. Like this, I'm not right to be playing this role. But eventually, one will be right for you, and whether that was, one of my earlier jobs was the cut, or not Fade Away, where they needed someone who looks like a young Mick Jagger, whatever it is. And I think the key to that is, no matter, even if you think you're not correct for the role, which might be the case, it very simply might be the case, and sometimes you walk into the room and you see someone go, no, they're not right for it, which is fine as well, but you put on a good show every time. You make sure you do a good enough job, because two things could happen. One, if you're absolutely not right for the role, that casting director is going to remember, like, they weren't right for that role, but they're a damn good actor, so let's put them in the good actors pile. And two, damn, they did a good job. Maybe we should change this character a little bit, because we really like him. Maybe we should shift this character a little bit so it works with him and who he is, because we like him well enough to shift what the stimulus is,
which is not unknown.
It's actually not uncommon. You'd be amazed how quickly that thing happens, because very, very often now scripts are written with an actor in mind. And let's say Chris Hemsworth can't do that film because he's filming Thor 17 or whatever it is. He can't do it, so now you need to be looking at, okay, well, who else can do this role? Oh, actually, yeah, that'll work, because we can just shift these little things and we can make this work with these people. So booking jobs off the bat is always hard work, and I think the best thing to do is, you're going to get a job eventually, get that first job, get onto set and learn everything you can. Every word, listen to every word everyone says. Don't be afraid of asking questions. My first set, I'm like, okay, back to ones. I don't know what that means. Where's that? And they're just like, it means back to where you started. Great, perfect, cool. And don't be afraid to ask those questions, because if you don't and you keep messing up, that's going to slow people down more. Just be very open to the experience and make sure you take everything in like a sponge as much as you can. Again, be present, be there at every opportunity, because there's the element of luck that, be in the right place at the right time. The other side of that is, make sure you're there at the right place at the right time. Make sure when it comes down to it, you are ready to go and you are going to give a stellar performance. Yeah.
Well, as a final question for you then, thank you again for joining us.
Of course.
We have one from Alexander here. What was your transition from the UK to Los Angeles like? So do you have any advice on UK actors that want to make that transition?
That's tricky, and we were talking a little bit about this earlier before the interview started. I really struggled with the transition to, any foreign country really. It was really hard work, because I get very homesick. I miss my mum and my family and my brothers and my sister. That was something I really struggled with. And I think the key thing, especially when you're in somewhere so alien and also somewhere so competitive, because the people you're going to meet day to day, they're going to be doing what you do. They're going to be wanting to be, another actor, because you're going to meet people at castings every day. And the key thing that I did, and these are the people that I keep very, very close, as I made my group, I found my group, and there's only about 5 or 6 of us, and they're like my sort of ride or dies in LA, and they all know my family, and they know my friends, and all my friends know them, and they all know each other. I think the key thing to me was finding people that I could really trust. So if you have a rough day, or you go to an audition that you really wanted and you just bin it and it's terrible, and you can come back and you can have a beer and a cry with people that you genuinely trust and that trust you. And that was the biggest thing for me, transitioning sort of to LA. But I'm still in that place where I get homesick and I miss being at home, and think, maybe I should just move back to London. Maybe that's the thing to do right now, and then something else comes up and I've got to stay for a little while, and that's fine, or I've got to come to New York and do X, Y, and Z. And the reality is, in this career, no matter where it is, you're probably going to be traveling somewhere at some point. Whether it's, you're doing a movie for 3 months, or you're doing a TV show for 3 years in Toronto, you just don't know. You are going to be traveling about, and you are going to be working hard. Fortunately, if it's something that you love, then you're enjoying it every day. And that was the advice I was given when I was younger, that whatever it is that you do, you better make sure you love it, because if you're good at it, you're going to be doing it every day. So you need to make sure that you're happy doing that every day, for any career, I suppose. But I think the big thing with this and the amount of travel we do is really making sure that your support system is very secure. So even if I can't get a hold of my buddies in LA, I know that my mum is always there for me. I know my mum, and she's very much, my mum and my dad are very much like my rocks. So if anything does go wrong, or if I have a bad day, you know, my dad will send me an email that will cheer me up, or my mum just dislocated her toe and she sent me a photo of that. And I'm like, that's grim, but it made me smile, so that's kind of cool.
Sure.
So yeah, it's like things like that. And I think the key thing for traveling and being in a foreign space is really grounding yourself in who you are and who the people are around you.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I think that's a great note to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
today.
you. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Congratulations on the final round of Shadowhunters.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Great.
Oh,
awesome. That was lovely. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
No.